Welcome back, everybody. Today we are reviewing FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, the fraud, the collapse. We're going to do a very easy to understand timeline walkthrough of what happened, why it happened, and then go over quickly what some of the impacts are going to be and effects coming down the line here in the next months and years even to kind of get you guys up to speed on that. So let's dive right in. So first of all, zooming back to a little less than a month ago, one of the first things that cascaded this into kind of a set of dominoes and started everything was this article that came out, which basically details leaked financial documents and talks about how Alameda, Sam Bankman-Fried's research company, as well as FTX, the exchange company, is very intertwined and almost too intertwined. So Alameda had $14.6 billion worth of assets as of June 30th. But what this financial document was saying was that much of it is the FTT token issued by FTX, which is another SBF company, which is a big no-no, especially if you're asking and telling people that, you know, the investments they're making are completely different in Alameda and in FTX when really they're the same underlying asset and currency that's actually valuing the company. So that's kind of what started the overall questions. And then what happened after that was essentially Binance, just a few days later, I believe 5 days later, basically said the company was going to liquidate $580 million worth of the FTT token, which again is the FTX in-house token. And that set off a ton of withdrawals, a ton of concern across all of crypto. Shortly after that, Sam Bankman-Fried says everything's okay. It's fake news, essentially. But what happens after that, and you can remember that, you know, FTX and Binance were actually talking about a buyout where Binance buys FTX. And I'm assuming a lot of that, you know, came from, a lot of this scrutiny came from that thought that they were going to buy them out. They see some of these financial documents and then decide to actually liquidate a lot of their investment. And then after that, on November 11th, FTX and Alameda filed for bankruptcy, and SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, actually resigned as CEO. And he basically just said he effed up. You know, he wrote a very long Twitter apology. Here it is. I don't think it was very well received. It was like 35 different tweets in a thread. And, you know, not too many people really believe this. I think it came under a lot of scrutiny. And people kind of said this as like, you know, you need to be understanding that this is something that could happen if you're not managing your books, right? So I don't know if too many people bought the whole apology. It seemed like it was more of a branding kind of route, right? Save face, that kind of thing. But nevertheless, he apologizes after all of this, after they file for bankruptcy, after he resigns, and then after that, a fellow by the name of John Ray, who is a restructuring expert who actually worked on the Enron fraud and the liquidation of Enron back, a few decades back, he basically said he came in and looked at the documents and said, never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information as occurred here. And the filing actually contains evidence of a ton of mismanagement and potential fraud taking place under SBF's leadership. And some of these lawyers that are involved as well really say that this looks a ton like fraud. It's just that can the U.S. pursue the same type of recourse given that there's some, additional complexity given that SBF has, basically incorporated FTX and Alameda in the Bahamas. There's going to be a little bit more to kind of circumvent there, but if fraud is evidential, if the evidence of fraud is there, it's going to be pursued, and we'll kind of talk about what's actually happening in today's time frame and what those next steps look like here in a moment. But one of the other things that I wanted to mention here was that at the time of bankruptcy, basically, FTX indicated that it had liabilities of $10 billion to $50 billion at the time of filing. And there was also some scrutiny around a $10 billion transfer of customer funds from FTX to Alameda that occurred. And oddly enough, it's right around the $8 billion that was actually going to be owed to customers as well. And we'll talk about that and what's going on here in a moment. But there were $10 billion of customer funds transferred. And basically, they're saying they used a backdoor to avoid triggering accounting red flags, which is a big, suspect kind of thing to be doing, especially during this kind of turbulent time. So really, really interesting. I think that is definitely a massive red flag. And then if we look at what has actually been coming of all of this, I think the worst part is kind of the contagion that this has created, right? Now we're starting to realize how much FTX and Alameda had in investments across the entire crypto industry. It is really unlikely that you have not touched something that they're invested in. So this is just a basic diagram kind of showing all of the different crypto projects that SBF himself, FTX Ventures, FTX, and Alameda Research have invested in. So he actually has 4 or 5 different LLCs, companies that have millions of dollars that are investing across the entire crypto industry. And you're going to see a lot of big names that you recognize, right? BlockFi, obviously they're kind of meeting their demise here, filing for bankruptcy today. Robinhood, things like Liquid, things like Circle, Genesis Digital, a lot of different companies here, right? I mean, you're talking about even Near Protocol, Masari, Miston Labs. There are just so many different companies that SBF and his whole cohort of companies had investments in. Now, what that creates when, there's basically a bank run and everyone's trying to withdraw their funds and there's no funds to be withdrawn, it's also going to impact the integrity of the investment from the other companies that FTX and all these companies were invested in, right? So this is kind of the major concern right now, is that when is the last domino going to fall, right? Because if all of this fraudulent money is being tossed around and being eaten up and burned by these other companies, how much of these other companies are going to go bankrupt here in the near future? We saw BlockFi. We saw some concern around Genesis. We saw some concern around Gemini. And I think we're going to see a lot more go bankrupt, guys. I just think that there's really no way, when you follow the trail of money and how many companies SBF was involved in, and even acquired a lot of these companies as well, we're going to see some fallout from this fraudulent investment, setup and what he was running here at FTX. But really clearly seems like fraud. And I think that we're going to, see this play out even more and more. Now, as we were saying previously, basically when Binance pulled this 580 million, the FTT token collapsed. A lot of people actually started withdrawing from FTX when they filed for bankruptcy. FTX didn't have those funds. They withdraw customer funds. So a lot of customer funds basically just evaporated. So they owe a ton of people money. But the other thing that we were talking about was this kind of contagion. So Gemini, BlockFi, and Genesis, announced restrictions. BlockFi today actually announced Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And I think we're going to see a lot of this continue through a lot of the investments that FTX had in these different crypto companies across the industry. Now, if we go into a little bit of what's happening today, basically SBF, FTX, Alameda, all of his companies are basically being investigated now by the SEC and the Justice Department. So we're going to see some sort of recourse for what's happened. I don't know how far they'll get with him. Hopefully, given what he's done and the amount of money that he's lost to people, certainly probably deserves jail time. But it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. We also had just about a few days ago, we had the first hearings in their bankruptcy case. And, obviously the fella, John Ray, who was working on the Enron case, was also there and kind of reporting what he had found. And that's when, we heard a lot about what was going on internally there. But basically now it's, as the dust is settling, it seems as though SBF and FTX actually owe more than 1 million people and organizations some amount of money. So they used to manage about 32 billion across all of their investments and what they had invested in them. But now they owe money to over 1 million people. They're owing customers upwards of $8 billion, $10 billion. And it's not looking like many people will get that money back. So if we look at what these lawyers for FTX have said just recently, they're actually citing that there's a substantial amount of company assets that have either been stolen or were missing. So this is kind of casting doubt on the ability for customers to get their funds back. It's not really looking great. Definitely feeling sorry for anyone out there who had money in FTX, had that confidence and held it there. Many other people did as well. You're definitely not alone. But this is a great reminder to get a Ledger wallet and have your actual ownership of your digital currencies, right, instead of having them on an exchange. But it's looking like that those will not be coming back in terms of the customer funds. We'll see if the SEC or their Justice Department actually orders payment of funds from SBF, but that remains to be seen. The other kind of curious thing that has happened is that a lot of politicians were involved in investing in FTX, and he quickly, just over 3-4 years, developed all these really in-depth relationships with high value politicians, other figures, and it's really still going to be fleshed out over the next 6 months or so what that involvement actually looked like. Is there fraud there? Was there some sort of illegal donations made? We know SBF is actually one of the top donors to the Democratic Party overall. And so that's going to be looked into as well. If there's any fraud or activity going there, were stolen funds used to fund campaigns? Who knows? But that's another aspect of this that's kind of unraveling in real time as well. Now, if we talk about the latest, that's the latest on the case and in terms of the action being taken against SBF. What are the likelihood of funds? Who else is involved? But if you guys follow crypto, you definitely know Ben Armstrong, BitBoy Crypto. Recently, he actually went down to the Bahamas and staked out SBF's place. So he's been kind of putting him on blast. He's found his car. He's been able to take pictures of his car. He knows he's there, trying to get him to respond somehow. And so just a couple hours ago, BitBoy Crypto actually broke this on a tweet and said SBF has actually agreed to do a Twitter Spaces with him in the next 2 weeks. He's unblocked him from Twitter, so now there's some open communication there. And it's likely that in the next few weeks, we actually hear a public statement from SBF. We haven't heard something other than, lawyer speak or something like that from him in a long time. It's been about 2 weeks now since we've actually heard from him, speaking for himself. So it'll be interesting to see what the next steps are here. But in all likelihood, guys, SBF is looking at jail time or at a minimum serious fines that will, make sure that he's really never able to have activities in the crypto space ever again, let alone in the financial space and investments as well. So that's everything I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know if, what your thoughts are on this in the comments. I mean, this is massive. This is going to affect crypto for quite a long time. There's still going to be a lot of bleeding, a lot of groups going under. But, again, this is maybe overall positive for regulation and everything else needs to come to crypto to take us to that next level of crypto adoption. So would love to hear your thoughts, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Bye-bye.